Why was she the only one standing when everyone else had fallen? The question hung in the dust, in the heat, in the silence that follows gunfire. But that moment, it was still years away. To understand her strength, you have to know where it came from. The town of Bourne, Texas, barely made a mark on a map. A scatter of barns, cattle pastures, and dirt roads where time moved at the speed of cattle hooves. For Elena Carter, childhood meant sunburned days spent wrestling hay bales heavier than her frame, chasing stray calves until her lungs begged her to stop. But she didn't stop. She never did. Her grandfather's Navy Cross sat in a glass case by the window. Every Sunday after church, he would polish it until it gleamed. He'd sit with the medal in his hand, staring out at the dusty road beyond the porch, his voice low as he spoke of war. Not the kind sung about in songs, not the kind told in tall tales. He spoke of brotherhood, of carrying men when their bodies couldn't carry themselves, of standing when the only thing inside you begged you to fall. Elena never interrupted him. She just listened. The pauses between his words carried as much weight as the words themselves. And in those pauses, in the silences where memory pressed down like lead, she learned what strength really meant. By the time she was 16, the ranch had become her crucible. She was wiry, quiet, often underestimated. But pain had become a language she understood. Calluses tore and grew back harder. Blisters turned into scars. She never said the word quit, not once. At 18, her decision was set. Not a college, not the ranch. She wanted the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. She wanted the Corps. The recruiting station in San Antonio smelled of sweat and cheap coffee. Behind the desk sat Sergeant Mitchell, a Marine who had seen too many hopefuls walk through the door with bravado that collapsed under the weight of boot camp. He studied her from head to toe. Dust still clung to her jeans. Her boots were worn. Her voice was steady but low when she said, "I want to enlist." Mitchell leaned back, brows rising. "You're not very tall," he said finally. "Boot camp's not kind to anyone, especially someone your size." Elena didn't flinch. "I've worked 16-hour days in 100-degree heat. I don't quit when things hurt. I won't quit there either." Silence stretched between them. Then a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He slid the paperwork across the desk. "Sign here, Carter. Let's see if you're as tough as you think." Her hand didn't shake as she wrote her name. That moment was the first step toward a life that would test every piece of her. Boot camp started in darkness and ended in exhaustion. Days blurred into sweat, shouts, and silence. Drill instructors broke recruits down with runs, push-ups, obstacle courses, and endless repetition. Elena wasn't the fastest. She wasn't the strongest. But when others collapsed on the track, she stayed upright. When her arms quivered on the last push-up, she forced one more. When blistered feet begged her to quit, she laced her boots tighter. Insults hurled in her face slid off like rain. She never barked back. She just kept moving, her silence as sharp as any weapon. Recruits began whispering behind her back, not mockery but awe. Stoneface, they called her, because nothing broke her. Graduation morning came with banners snapping in the wind. Families cheered from the stands. Elena stood in the center of the ranks, not the front, but unbroken. Her grandfather was there, saluting quietly. She caught his eye only once. The pride in his gaze told her everything words never could. Her first assignment wasn't glamorous. The 17th Logistics Battalion in California wasn't combat, not the firefights she imagined when she signed her name. It was crates, forklifts, endless inventory sheets. But every bullet, every ration, every bandage passed through her unit. Mistakes weren't allowed. The cost was too high. Some Marines respected her work. They noticed she showed up before dawn, left long after dark, never complained. But others weren't impressed. Corporal Henson, a wall of muscle with tattoos crawling down his arms, made sure of that. "This isn't a playground for women in uniform," he sneered whenever she passed. Elena said nothing. She kept her eyes forward. Silence, again, was her weapon. And when sandbags needed moving, she volunteered. When trucks needed loading in the rain, she stepped forward. Action spoke louder than mockery. But silence came at a cost. In the barracks, after another 14-hour shift, she sometimes sat alone, staring at the phone in her hand. When it buzzed with a call from her grandfather, she answered immediately. "Remember, Elena," his voice rasped, weathered but steady, "being a Marine isn't about how strong you look. It's about standing when others fall." She pressed her hand against her pocket where his silver coin rested. He had carried it through Vietnam. Now it was hers. Every morning before roll call she touched it. Every night before sleep, too. It wasn't magic, but it reminded her she wasn't alone in the fight. Months passed in rhythm, shipments, drills, long nights under fluorescent lights, but she knew the real test hadn't come yet. It came 6 months later, orders stamped with a destination that sucked the air out of the room: Afghanistan. Forward Operating Base Iron Creek wasn't much more than a blot of concrete in an ocean of sand. The thermometer climbed past 120 degrees by noon. Dust choked every breath. High ridges surrounded the base, perfect ground for enemy eyes. Chaos tried to become order inside the walls. Convoys rolled in and out. Helicopters whipped sandstorms that blinded eyes and burned throats. Elena was assigned to the logistics nerve center, maps pinned to every wall, radio static a constant companion. Her job was to study movement patterns, ambush timings, supply gaps. One route looked safe on paper, but she flagged it as a kill zone. Another looked too long, but she saw it was the only road without recent attacks. Lieutenant Spencer, sharp-eyed and young, started trusting her word. "Which route today, Carter?" he asked before every convoy. And more than once, her judgment saved lives. But Henson never let up. "Paper shuffling doesn't make you a Marine," he muttered after a briefing. "Real Marines fight outside the wire." She ignored him as always. Every crate that arrived safely, every convoy that returned intact, was her answer. 3 months passed. Tension wound tighter every day. Everyone knew an attack was coming. No one knew when. The Afghan sky glowed purple the evening it arrived. The first rocket slammed into the perimeter. The ground bucked like an earthquake. Sirens screamed. Marines sprinted for bunkers, rifles in hand, helmets strapped. Dust rained from the ceiling as Elena bolted from the supply shed, helmet and rifle gripped tight. Corporal Henson was already crouched in a bunker, grinning even as explosions rattled the walls. "Try not to cry when the real bullets start flying," he sneered. She didn't answer. Her rifle clicked into place against the firing slit. The ridges outside spat muzzle flashes. Tracer rounds arced across the night like red lightning. Insurgents hammered the walls with machine guns and RPGs. Marines returned fire, disciplined bursts, towers roaring with M240s. Elena steadied her rifle, breath slow, eyes locked. She shouted coordinates and fired in controlled bursts. Figures in the rocks dropped. For the first time, Henson turned toward her with no insult on his lips. Surprise flickered in his eyes. But the assault wasn't finished. Mortars shook the ground. Then came the roar of an engine. A truck armored in crude steel barreled straight for the main gate. Bullets sparked against its frame. It never slowed. If it reached the wall, Iron Creek would fall. Elena's eyes locked on a weakness, a loose plate near the front wheel, exposed. She bolted from the bunker. Bullets chewed the dirt around her. Henson's voice broke behind her. "Carter, get back here." She didn't stop. Her hand seized the cold weight of an RPG. She dropped to one knee, braced, aimed. The truck swerved closer, headlights cutting through the smoke. One shot, that was all. The rocket screamed across the desert. Impact tore the night apart. Fire swallowed steel. The truck split in two, a storm of flame and shrapnel. The shockwave hurled Elena backward, her body slamming into the concrete wall. Her helmet flew. Shrapnel ripped across her face. Her vision went black. Boots thundered around her. voices shouting, hands lifting her onto a stretcher. "Don't let her die," the commander roared. "She just saved Iron Creek." Her blood soaked the bandages. The world blurred into sirens and smoke. Then silence, and darkness swallowed her whole. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? Elena Carter opened her eyes to a ceiling she didn't recognize. White tiles blurred above her. A faint antiseptic sting filled her nose. Beeping machines pulsed beside her head, steady, relentless. Germany, that was the first word she heard. A medic's voice, low and careful, told her where she was. Ramstein Medical Center. She had been unconscious for days. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else. Her left shoulder wrapped in heavy dressings. Her legs stitched with metal staples. She tried to move, but pain rushed in sharp, unforgiving waves. The surgeons told her what they had done. Shrapnel had torn through muscle and nerves. One fragment still sat buried deep in her arm, too dangerous to remove. And her face, a scar now cut from temple to jawline. Even with careful surgery, it would never disappear. Elena didn't ask for a mirror, not yet. 3 weeks later, she was flown to the United States. Walter Reed Army Medical Center became her new battlefield. The halls smelled of bleach. The air carried the shuffle of crutches and the soft hum of wheelchairs rolling across tile. For the first month, she wasn't alone. Marines who had survived Iron Creek visited often. They thanked her, pressed her hand, left tokens, a patch, a coin, a note scribbled in awkward handwriting. "You saved us. We owe you." Her room filled with small reminders that what she had done mattered. But as weeks passed, the visits faded. Gratitude has a half-life. New deployments, new battles, new wounds. The world moved forward. She was left behind. One evening, while making her way down the hallway, she caught 2 young Marines whispering outside the cafeteria. "Scarface," one muttered. "Probably her fault for standing too close to the truck," the other replied. Their laughter was quiet but sharp enough to cut. Elena froze. Her fists clenched until her knuckles went white. But she said nothing. Not then. She walked past them, jaw tight, chest burning. The whispers grew bolder in the weeks that followed. She felt their stares, their sideways glances. The name spread like smoke. Scarface. In the cafeteria, one Marine called out across the room. "Hey, Scarface, did you run or fight?" Laughter rippled around his table. Elena stopped walking. For the first time, she turned toward them. She set her tray gently on their table. Her voice, calm and sharp, carried through the room. "I didn't run, I fired. That truck never reached you because of me. If you want to know about VBIDs, ask me. If you just want a joke, do it outside." The laughter died. Silence spread heavy as stone. The young Marines stared at their trays, shame creeping across their faces. Elena lifted her tray, walked away, and sat alone. Respect hadn't been earned, not yet, but the sting of her words lingered. Still, silence was heavier now than any insult. Weeks later, she joined a therapy circle under bright lights, folding chairs arranged in a ring. A counselor, Dr. Wells, encouraged them to speak. When it was her turn, Elena described Iron Creek. The rockets, the armored truck, the RPG in her hands. Her voice was quiet, steady. But before she finished, a corporal cut in. His tone was sharp, mocking. "Come on, Carter, you just got lucky. Don't act like some hero." Several Marines chuckled. The sound echoed through her ears, hollow and cruel. Her throat closed, her chest tightened. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against tile, and walked out. Only in the empty hallway did the tears come. Silent, raw, burning. For months she had carried pain without breaking. But that laughter, it cracked her armor. That night she called home. Her grandfather's voice came through the line, steady as ever. "Talk to me, Elena." "They call me Scarface," she whispered. "They think I was reckless. Maybe I don't belong anymore." Silence stretched across the line. Then his voice, firm, unshaken. "Strength isn't about scars fading. It's about standing again after the fall. You've done it before. You'll do it again. She pressed the silver coin into her palm until its edge bit her skin. His words settled like steel inside her. By dawn, her decision was made. The gym became her new battlefield. Master Sergeant Reed waited for her there, a man who had lost half a leg years earlier, but moved with authority that silenced entire rooms. "You ready to work?" he asked. Elena nodded once, no excuses. Training was merciless. Pull-ups tore her arms with fire. Laps around the track left her lungs raw. Rain soaked her hair as she ran before sunrise, boots pounding wet pavement. Sit-ups burned her scarred muscles until she collapsed on the mat. But she got up, always. Progress came slow, then steady. One more repetition, one less pause between laps. Other wounded Marines began to notice. Some joined her. She didn't speak much, but her silence drew them in. Her grit spoke louder than words. Still, the whispers didn't vanish. Some young Marines snickered when she passed. Their eyes darted to her scar, lingering just long enough. This time she didn't look away. She met their gaze unflinching. Her scar was no longer shame. It was proof. Proof that she had stood when others would have fallen. Word spread, carried further than she realized. Rumors reached the ears of Marine leadership. Among them was Major General Margaret Collins. Known for her sharp sense of justice, Collins commanded one of the largest installations in the country. When she heard about Elena, she made a decision. She would see for herself. Collins arrived quietly, unannounced. One afternoon, she sat in the cafeteria, blending into the crowd. She watched as Elena entered, carrying her tray, scar catching the light. She saw the smirks, heard the mutters, saw the moment Elena stopped, set her tray down, and replied with calm fire that froze the air. Collins didn't reveal herself. She simply wrote one note in her small book, stood, and walked away. Elena didn't notice her. For her, it was just another day survived. But the tide was already shifting, quietly, unseen. The real test was coming. The morning air outside Walter Reed cut like glass. Marines gathered along the track, whispering bets. This was Elena Carter's evaluation. Pass and she stayed in. Fail and her career ended. She stepped to the pull-up bar. Gloves tightened on cold steel. 10 reps minimum. Her first 5 came steady, though her shoulder burned. By 7, her arms shook. By 9, her body quivered. She grit her teeth, forced herself upward one more time. 10. She dropped down, gasping, her body trembling. The crowd, silent at first, broke into murmurs of surprise. Even Henson, watching from the back, stayed quiet. Next, the run, 3 miles. Her breath puffed white against the November sky. Her boots pounded steady. Pain lanced through her legs, but she didn't falter. She crossed the finish line nearly 2 minutes under the requirement. And then came the surprise. Casualty evacuation drill. A weighted dummy strapped to a stretcher. Smoke machines pumping, sirens blaring, explosions booming from speakers. 2 Marines at her sides, faces tight. Elena seized the front handle. Left steady, eyes forward, move. Her voice cut through the chaos. Her shoulders screamed with each step, but she never slowed. The stretcher lurched forward, mud sucking at their boots. Smoke burned her eyes. Artificial blasts rattled the ground. She barked orders until they crossed the line. They dropped the dummy. She fell to one knee, chest heaving. The observing colonel nodded once. Noted. The word carried weight. She had passed. But the test wasn't over. That afternoon, she walked into a conference room. A long table under harsh lights. 5 senior officers waiting. At the center, Major General Collins. Elena stood at attention, uniform perfect, scar visible. "This board is convened to determine your fitness for continued service," Colonel Price announced. His voice flat, his eyes unreadable. Questions came fast. Could she carry full combat load? Could her body endure? Would her scar affect the core image? Would trauma freeze her in battle? Her answers were steady, calm, firm. I didn't freeze when a truck full of explosives charged my base, she said. I won't freeze when Marines need me again. And when asked how she'd face mockery if it continued, she didn't hesitate. I don't ask for lowered standards. I don't ask for sympathy. Respect is earned by performance, and I'll prove it every day. She was dismissed while the board deliberated. Her heart pounded. Her grandfather's coin pressed hard into her palm. Behind closed doors, debate raged. The medical officer doubted her health. The personnel chief muttered about optics. But Collins rose to her feet. I saw her mocked in front of her peers, she said. I saw how she responded, with composure, with dignity, with courage. That is leadership. She is not a liability. She is exactly what the Corps needs. Her words cut through the room. The silence after was heavy, then the balance shifted. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Elena Carter would stay. Why did the room fall so silent when the general spoke? Elena Carter stood outside the conference chamber, her back straight, her boots fixed to the floor as if rooted in place. The door opened, and she was called in. Her pulse pounded like war drums inside her chest. Colonel Price read the board's decision aloud. Lance Corporal Carter, this board finds you fit for continued military service. No restrictions, no limitations. The words struck her like sunlight after months of shadow. She had braced herself for rejection, for the quiet dismissal that would have ended everything she had fought to keep. Instead, relief surged through her chest, so sudden, so overwhelming that she almost swayed where she stood. But she did not move. She kept her bearing. She kept her silence. Before she could answer, Major General Margaret Collins leaned forward. Her voice carried something different. Not the clipped, detached tone of procedure, but something personal, deliberate. There is one more matter, Collins said. The room cleared. Officers filed out quietly until only the two women remained. The silence pressed down, heavy but not hostile. Collins studied her in a way that made Elena feel both exposed and seen. I'm launching a program, the general began. Wounded Warrior Advocacy. A command-level initiative to fight discrimination, to give Marines like you a voice. Her gaze sharpened. I want you on my team. The words stunned her more than any battlefield explosion. You'll travel to bases, Collins continued. You'll speak to Marines, not about pity, not about weakness, about resilience, about leadership. You'll help change this culture. Elena's throat tightened. Why me? Collins didn't blink. Because you've lived it, because you turned mockery into resolve, because strength isn't hiding scars, it's carrying them. The scar across her face tingled as though it remembered the words. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. She had dreamed of returning to her unit, of quietly serving again, blending back into the ranks. But this was something larger, heavier. If I can spare one Marine what I endured, she said finally, her voice low but firm, it's worth it. Collins extended her hand. Outstanding, welcome to the fight. Their handshake sealed something new, a mission not chosen but given. The first weeks were disorienting. Gone were the long corridors of Walter Reed. Gone were the grueling therapy sessions and the quiet battles against doubt. Now she walked through offices with polished floors, briefing rooms with sterile lighting, command centers where her name carried whispers of curiosity. She received binders full of schedules, talking points, and program outlines. But when she opened them at night, the words blurred. She didn't want speeches written by others. She didn't want scripted lines. She wanted truth. And truth, she knew, wasn't neat. It was raw, it was scarred. Her first speaking engagement arrived sooner than she was ready for. A base auditorium in North Carolina. Rows of Marines filled the seats, faces hard, skeptical. Some crossed their arms. Some leaned back, waiting to be unimpressed. The room was quiet when she walked to the podium. Her scar caught the harsh stage lights. She felt the weight of every stare, every breath. She gripped the sides of the lectern. Her palms were damp, her chest tight. For a moment her voice caught in her throat. Then she remembered the silver coin in her pocket. She pressed it once, quick, like a silent prayer. She didn't read from the papers provided. She folded them, set them aside. "My name is Lance Corporal Elena Carter," she began. Her voice was steady, though not loud. "I stood at Iron Creek the night a truck full of explosives charged our gate." The room shifted, back straightened, eyes sharpened. "I fired the shot that stopped it. I saved the base, but I didn't leave without scars." She paused, letting the silence breathe. "Some you can see, some you can't." She spoke of Walter Reed, of the whispers, of the name Scarface and how it cut deeper than shrapnel. She spoke of walking into a cafeteria and being laughed at, and how silence was heavier than pain. And then she spoke of choice, of rising anyway, of refusing to let mockery write her story. When she finished, the room was silent. Not empty, not cold, but silent with a different weight. The kind of silence that comes when words sink too deep for applause. Then a young private stood. His right arm ended at the wrist, wrapped in fresh bandages. His voice trembled. "I thought I was finished," he said, "but you showed me scars aren't endings." Elena's chest tightened. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her grandfather's coin. She pressed it into his remaining hand. "It carried me," she said softly. "Now it's yours." Tears welled in his eyes. His fist closed around the coin as though holding onto something more than metal. The hall remained hushed, a moment suspended in time, a moment no one present would forget. Afterward, Marines approached quietly, not for autographs, not for pictures, but for words, for reassurance, for something real. Some just nodded, some gripped her shoulder, some whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the dawn was breaking. Elena stepped into the cold morning air. The sun touched the scar across her face, sharp and unhidden. For the first time since Iron Creek, she felt the weight of it lift. Not gone, never gone, but no longer a burden. Still, nights were hard. In the quiet of her quarters, doubt returned. She wondered if she was strong enough to carry the stories of others, if she could bear not just her scars, but theirs. But each time she faltered, she remembered her grandfather's voice. Strength isn't about scars fading. It's about standing again after the fall. She stood again and again. In the months that followed, her mission grew. She traveled from base to base, her words reaching Marines who once thought silence was their only armor. She met amputees learning to walk again. She met young women mocked for being small, for being different. She met men who had seen too much, carried too much, but still showed up each day. And everywhere she went, she saw something change. Not overnight, not in a flash, but slowly. A shift in eyes, in posture, in silence. Her scar, once a source of mockery, had become something else. Proof. But beneath it all, a question lingered. How long could she keep carrying this new mission? Could she be more than a survivor? Could she be the leader Collins believed she was? The answer had not yet come. But the world was about to ask more of her than she had ever imagined. Why did some eyes burn colder when others looked at her with respect? Elena Carter felt it before she ever heard it. A shift in the air, a stiffness in certain rooms. Not every Marine welcomed her rising presence. Not every officer approved of Collins' decision to place her as the face of something new. It started with the stares. Subtle, quick glances during briefings, whispers trailing off when she entered a room. Some Marines saluted with a formality that carried no warmth. Some nodded without meeting her eyes. She understood it. Not everyone believed scars should stand on podiums. Some thought she was exploiting her wound, cashing in on tragedy. Others believed she had been chosen for pity, not for merit. Rumors spread faster than orders. She was a puppet. She was a token. She was a distraction from real Marines. The whispers stung, but she refused to answer them with words. Her days stretched into long hours. Early mornings spent preparing briefings, late nights reading reports from bases across the country. She listened to stories from wounded Marines, scribbling notes in the margins of her journal, carrying their pain alongside her own. She never showed her exhaustion in public, not when she stepped onto stages, not when she sat across from commanders, but behind closed doors, the weight pressed harder than body armor ever had. There were nights she lay awake in her barracks room, staring at the ceiling, the scar on her face burning as if it remembered every insult. Am I strong enough for this? Or am I just pretending? She pressed the coin into her palm until its edges left marks on her skin. Only then did sleep come. Her next tour took her to Camp Pendleton, a sprawling base, alive with engines, boots, and drills. The auditorium was packed. Hundreds of Marines filled the seats. She walked to the stage, scar visible, bearing unshaken. Her speech was simple, stripped of any polished phrases. She spoke of standing alone in a bunker while tracer fire slashed the night, of pulling an RPG to her shoulder when others froze, of being carried away on a stretcher, not knowing if she'd wake again. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile. Then came the applause, not thunderous, not wild but steady, respectful. Afterward, a line formed. Marines waited to speak with her. Some shared stories of their own wounds, others just said thank you. But in the back she saw him, Corporal Henson, the same man who had mocked her in Afghanistan. He stood with his arms crossed, face unreadable. When the crowd thinned, he approached. "You talk well," he muttered, "but words don't win battles." She met his eyes, calm, steady. "Neither do insults." For a moment silence stretched between them. Then, to her surprise, he gave a short nod, not approval, not friendship, but recognition. It was the closest thing to respect she would ever get from him. Still, not everyone softened. Weeks later, at a leadership meeting, she felt the sting of opposition sharpen. Senior officers sat around a polished table, papers and laptops scattered. Elena briefed them on the advocacy program, statistics, testimonies, recommendations. One colonel, face stern, interrupted. "Carter, with all due respect, your experience is personal. We cannot restructure culture based on anecdotes." The room stiffened. Colin's eyes narrowed, but she didn't intervene. She wanted to see how Elena would answer. Elena inhaled slowly, her scar pulling as her jaw tightened. "With all due respect, sir, culture isn't changed by numbers. It's changed by people. Marines don't remember statistics. They remember the face beside them in the fight. They remember who stood when the blast came." Her words settled like stone. The colonel said nothing more. After the meeting, Colin stopped her in the hallway. Her voice was low, private. "You're learning," she said. Elena nodded, though her chest still pounded. "It feels like a fight every time." "It is," Collins replied. "But some fights aren't won with rifles. They're won with patience, with presence, with scars." The general's words steadied her, but the doubt never disappeared completely. Her next challenge came unannounced. A group of Marines in the barracks lounge. Young, restless, loud. She walked in and the room fell silent. Then someone muttered just loud enough. "She's here, the general's pet." Laughter rippled. Elena froze for half a second. Then she walked forward, pulled out a chair, and sat down at their table. Her scar caught the overhead light. Her eyes never left theirs. "If you have something to say," she told them quietly, "say it to me." The room stilled. The Marine who had spoken shifted uncomfortably, eyes dropping to the floor. No one else dared. She stood, leaving the silence heavier than before. Word of the encounter spread, not because she shouted, not because she punished, but because she simply stood her ground. In the days that followed, Marines approached her differently. Some still kept their distance, but some began to nod with genuine respect. Some asked questions, some even apologized. But with every small victory came heavier weight. Collins called her into her office one evening. Maps and files spread across the desk. The general's face was lined with fatigue, her eyes sharp but weary. "You're becoming more than a Marine," Collins said. Elena frowned. "I didn't ask to be." "I know," Collins leaned back. "That's why it matters. People trust those who never ask to lead. They know you're not chasing glory. They know you're carrying something real." Elena swallowed. The words felt heavier than any order she had received before. "General," she said quietly, "what if I fail?" Collins' reply was firm, almost fierce. "You already didn't, you're still here." That night, Elena sat alone in her room. The scar across her face caught the dim glow of the lamp. She thought of Iron Creek, of the laughter at Walter Reed, of the coin pressed into her palm by her grandfather. She realized something she hadn't before. She had become more than a survivor, more than a symbol. She had become a mirror. Marines looked at her and saw not her but themselves, their own scars, their own doubts, their own strength. And that was terrifying. The next morning she woke before dawn, laced her boots, and ran until her lungs burned. Not to prove herself to others, but to remind herself she was still the Marine who refused to quit. Because the war ahead wasn't on a battlefield. It was in the silence of rooms, in the stares of doubters, in the whispers of those too afraid to speak aloud. And she was ready to fight it. How much weight can one person carry before they break? Elena Carter had learned how to carry crates of ammunition, how to shoulder wounded Marines, how to bear scars that cut deeper than skin. But she had never been taught how to carry expectations. Everywhere she went, eyes followed. When she stepped onto bases, whispers preceded her. "That's her, Carter, Scarface, the one who stopped the truck." Some eyes carried respect. Some carried resentment, but all carried weight. Her schedule was relentless. 1 week Camp Lejeune, the next Fort Benning, then Quantico, auditorium after auditorium, room after room filled with faces expecting something from her. Inspiration, courage, proof that survival could look like strength. And she gave it every time. She told the truth about Iron Creek, about Walter Reed, about standing in silence when laughter cut her down. Her voice steady, her bearing unbroken. Marines leaned in. Some cried. Some stared at her scar and saw themselves. But afterward, when the lights dimmed and the rooms emptied, she was alone. Always alone. In hotel rooms with beige walls and humming air conditioners, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing harder than any barrage. Her phone buzzed sometimes with messages from her grandfather. Short, steady notes. "Proud of you. Keep standing." She saved them all. But the calls grew fewer. His health was fading. And the thought of losing him, the one voice that had carried her through every battle, gnawed at her more than enemy fire ever had. On nights when sleep refused her, she'd sit at the edge of the bed, scar catching the faint light, and whisper into the quiet, "Who am I now? A Marine? A speaker? Or just a scar on display?" She wanted to believe she was still the same woman who had lifted an RPG at Iron Creek. But sometimes she wondered if that woman had disappeared the moment shrapnel carved her face. The program gained traction. Reports spread to headquarters. Articles circulated. Elena Carter, resilience in uniform. Elena Carter, the face of change. Elena Carter, proof that scars could be banners. But behind those headlines was a woman who hadn't laughed in months. During one event at Paris Island, a young recruit approached her afterward. His hand trembled as he spoke. "Ma'am, they keep saying I'm too small, that I'll never make it." Elena rested a hand on his shoulder, her voice low. "They said the same about me. You don't prove them wrong by talking. You prove them wrong by standing when they fall." The recruit nodded, eyes bright with something like hope. He walked away taller than before. But as she watched him leave, a thought struck sharp as shrapnel. Who lifts me when I fall? The question followed her everywhere. Even Collins noticed. The general pulled her aside one afternoon after a briefing. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, studied Elena's face. "You're burning out," Collins said plainly. I'm fine, Elena answered too quickly. You're not, Collins pressed. You think I don't know what it feels like to be turned into something larger than yourself, to have people stare at you like you're a banner instead of a human being. Elena said nothing. Collins' voice softened, though it still carried steel. Leadership is lonely, Carter, but loneliness doesn't have to break you. You need to find an anchor, something that's yours alone, or this mission will eat you alive. The word stayed with her. But what was hers alone? That night she went for a run. The base track stretched under a sky heavy with stars. Her breath came in ragged bursts, each step pounding the question deeper. Who am I if I'm not their symbol? Her legs ached, her scar stung with sweat, but she didn't stop. She ran until her chest burned and her throat tore. Only when she collapsed to her knees did she let the tears come. Quiet, hot, relentless. The next morning she sat with her grandfather on a video call. His face was thinner, his voice weaker, but his eyes still carried that familiar fire. They see me as something I'm not, Elena whispered, like I'm supposed to be stronger than I feel. Her grandfather leaned closer to the camera, his breath shallow but steady. Elena, strength isn't about feeling strong. It's about standing even when you don't. She bit her lip, trying to hold herself together. But what if I can't keep standing? He smiled faintly. Then you kneel, and then you stand again. That's all any of us ever did. The screen froze for a moment, his face caught mid-smile, then flickered back. She held on to that image long after the call ended. The following weeks blurred. Another base, another hall filled with expectant faces, another round of applause that sounded hollow in her ears. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer tried to be flawless. When her voice shook, she let it. When memories cut deep, she paused. And when Marines asked if she ever doubted, she told them the truth. Yes, she admitted one night in front of a silent crowd. I doubt, I hurt, I break, but I stand anyway. That's the only difference. The silence that followed was unlike any before. Not heavy, not hostile, but shared, collective. And for the first time, she felt less alone. Still, the exhaustion lingered. Her body carried it. Her eyes betrayed it. Even her scar seemed deeper on days when weariness consumed her. But she kept moving, because she knew if she stopped, even for a moment, the silence would return. And silence was heavier than scars. Late one night she stood outside her quarters looking up at the stars. The air was sharp, the world quiet. She thought of Iron Creek, of Walter Reed, of Collins, of her grandfather. She realized something. She wasn't carrying everyone else's scars. She was carrying her own. And by carrying them openly, she gave others permission to carry theirs. The weight didn't lessen, but it became bearable. Because strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking, then rising again. And she was still rising. Why did the cameras feel more dangerous than the rifles ever had? Elena Carter had faced rockets, mortars, and a truck filled with explosives. None of it rattled her like the sudden flash of cameras, the weight of microphones shoved in her face. The first article had been small, a profile buried in the military section of a local paper. Marine with scar becomes advocate. But then others followed. National outlets, networks, talk shows. Soon her name stretched beyond the Corps. Civilians who had never heard of Iron Creek spoke her name in grocery stores, on morning radio, across social media. At first she thought it might help. Maybe more eyes meant more awareness. Maybe more stories meant fewer Marines would feel invisible. But attention was never simple. Some praised her. Others twisted her image into something she never claimed to be. Hero, victim, poster child, symbol. And then came the critics. Commentators questioning her credibility. Columnists sneering at her scar. Anonymous voices online calling her a fraud, a puppet, a Marine who only survived by chance. She tried not to read the words, but they always found her. Headlines caught in passing. snippets overheard, comments screenshotted by well-meaning hands and sent to her phone. Scarface Carter, pity project. She's no hero, just a reminder of failure. If she were a man, would anyone care? Each line landed sharper than shrapnel. Collins called her into her office one evening. The general's desk was stacked with clippings and printouts. Her jaw was tight, her eyes sharp. "They're coming after you," Collins said bluntly. "I know," Elena replied, her voice flat. "They think if they tear you down, they can tear down the program." Elena's hands tightened into fists at her sides. "So what do I do? Fight back?" Collins shook her head. "No, you keep standing, that's the fight. You don't feed them words, you feed them proof." Elena nodded, but when she left the office, her chest still burned. Silence had always been her shield, but silence didn't stop words from cutting. The next test came in the form of a televised panel. She hadn't asked to be there. Orders had sent her. A stage lit by harsh lights, an audience beyond the cameras, a row of experts in pressed uniforms and dark suits. The topic: resilience in the armed forces. She sat at the end of the row, Scar catching every beam of light. Questions fired like rounds. Statistics, budgets, policies, the language of those who had never crouched in bunkers or carried stretchers through smoke. Then the moderator turned to her. "Lance Corporal Carter, some argue your story is anecdotal, that you've been elevated as a symbol but you don't represent the broader force. How do you respond?" The room went still, eyes locked on her, the kind of silence that waits for cracks. Her throat tightened, her scar pulsed. For a heartbeat she wanted to stay silent, to let the question pass. But then she remembered Collins' words, "Feed them proof." She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm but sharp. "My story is one Marine's," she said, "but every Marine's story begins the same way, with a choice. To stand when it would be easier to fall. Some stand on battlefields, some stand in hospitals, some stand when laughter tries to cut them down. I don't claim to speak for everyone. I only prove that standing is possible." The room remained silent. The moderator nodded once, moving to the next question. But in that silence, something shifted. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Elena replayed the moment in her head. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. But for the first time, she felt she had spoken not as a symbol, not as a victim, but as herself. Still, the storm didn't fade. Whispers within the Corps grew sharper. Some officers complained she was distracting from operations. Some Marines muttered that she had traded her rifle for a podium. One evening, while walking back from the gym, she overheard a pair of sergeants. "She's soft now," one said, "talks more than she fights." The words hit harder than they should have. She had bled in sand, carried scars no training could erase. But to them, that wasn't enough. That night she went to the range, alone. She loaded, aimed, and fired until her arms trembled, until the echoes shook something loose inside her. Each round punched through silence, through doubt, through the voices that told her she wasn't enough. When the last shell clattered to the ground, she stood in the haze of cordite, chest heaving. The target was shredded, proof, at least to herself, that the rifle was still part of her. Days later, Collins summoned her again. The general's voice carried a rare softness. "They're watching you from every angle now," she said. "You can't fight them all, so pick your ground. Decide who you're speaking to, the critics or the Marines who need you." Elena swallowed. Her voice was low, steady. "The Marines." Collins nodded, then let the rest burn. The next base visit came with unexpected fire. Protesters stood outside the gates. Some carried signs praising her, others condemning her, a circus she had never asked for. As her convoy rolled through, she stared out the window. Some shouted her name in cheers, others in jeers. Both sounded the same through the glass. Inside the auditorium, the air was tense. Marines shifted in their seats, restless from the noise outside. Elena walked to the podium, the whispers following like shadows. She paused before speaking, the The silence stretched. Finally, she said, "I'm not here to be a hero. I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here because once when a truck filled with explosives charged my base, I didn't run. I fired. And I survived. That's it. That's all." Her voice cracked just slightly, and in that crack the room leaned forward. She continued, softer now. "I'm not asking you to see me as more than I am. I'm asking you to see yourselves, your own scars, your own choices, your own strength." When she stepped away, the applause wasn't loud, but it was steady. Outside, protesters still shouted, cameras still flashed, but inside she had chosen her ground. That night in the quiet of her room, she whispered to herself, "I am not their symbol. I am a Marine." And though the storm raged louder than ever, she felt something unshaken inside her. Because no matter how loud the world shouted, dignity did not need to shout back. It simply stood. Why did the strongest voices always fade when you needed them most? Elena Carter sat on her bunk, phone pressed to her ear, listening to the faint rasp of her grandfather's breathing on the other end of the line. His voice, once steady as iron, now trembled like an old flag in the wind. "How's my Marine?" he asked, his humor faint but alive. She forced a smile, though he couldn't see it. "Still standing, Grandpa." "Good," he said, a cough breaking through. "That's all that matters." But the silence after carried weight. For the first time, Elena feared a day would come when his voice would not be there to answer. She carried that fear like hidden shrapnel. Her schedule pressed on relentlessly, flights, speeches, interviews, bases. She moved through each like a soldier on autopilot. She told her story. She steadied her voice. She stood before Marines who needed proof that scars could live with dignity. But each night she checked her phone, waiting for his call. And each time it came later, shorter, weaker. At Camp Pendleton, she delivered another address. Rows of young Marines stared up at her, some skeptical, some desperate. She spoke of survival, of silence heavier than wounds, of refusing to quit. They clapped. They lined up. They thanked her. But afterward, in the privacy of her quarters, she collapsed onto the bed and sobbed into her pillow. Not from exhaustion, not from pain, but from the creeping certainty that the man who had carried her through every storm was slipping away. One night the call came from her mother. Her voice was quiet, brittle. "Elena," she said, "it's time. If you want to see him, you need to come now." Elena didn't hesitate. Orders or not, speeches or not, she boarded the first plane home. The house in Bourne, Texas, smelled of dust and faint tobacco, just as it always had. But the man inside was smaller, frailer, his frame swallowed by the bed. The Navy Cross still gleamed in its glass case by the window, polished as always. When Elena stepped into the room, his eyes flickered open, weak but alive. "There she is," he whispered, "Stoneface." She knelt beside him, her scar catching the morning light. For a moment, she wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a spokesperson. She wasn't even a Marine. She was just a granddaughter, clutching the hand that had once lifted her onto his shoulders. "Grandpa," she said softly, "I don't know if I can keep doing this without you." His hand, weak but steady, squeezed hers. His voice rasped. "Yes, you can, because you're not doing it for me, you're doing it for them. Every Marine who thinks they can't stand again. You stand for them now." Her chest broke with sobs, but she held them back. She didn't want him to see her shatter. He smiled faintly, his eyes closing. "Remember, Elena, strength isn't scars fatting, it's standing after the fall." Hours later, his hand slipped from hers. His breath stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than any battlefield she had ever known. The funeral was small, family. A few veterans. The metal case placed beside the flag-draped coffin. Elena stood in her dress blues, her scar bright in the sunlight. She didn't cry, not in front of them. She saluted as the rifle volleys cracked the sky, each shot driving through her chest like another piece of shrapnel. That night alone, she finally wept until her body gave out. The next morning she rose before dawn. She walked to the old barn, the same one where she had lifted hay bales and chased cattle as a girl. The air was cool, the ground damp with dew. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, pressed her palms against the earth, and whispered, "I'll keep standing for you." When she returned to duty, something in her eyes had changed. Marines noticed. Her voice, once steady but soft, now carried a sharper edge. Her words cut deeper, not from anger but from truth forged in grief. At Quantico, she addressed a hall filled with officers and recruits. She spoke of loss, not just wounds on the battlefield, but the quiet loss of voices that once carried us. She spoke of finding strength not in never breaking, but in breaking and rising again. When she finished, the room was silent. Then slowly the applause rose, steady, relentless. But applause didn't heal. At night, she still reached for her phone, knowing it would never buzz again with his call. She still pressed the silver coin into her palm until its edge cut deep. She still whispered into the silence, waiting for an answer that never came. Yet each time she stepped on stage, she carried his words with her. Each time she faced a Marine who thought they were finished, she remembered his voice. Strength isn't scars fatting. It's standing after the fall. And in that way, he never left. Still, a question haunted her. Could she keep standing when the last piece of her anchor was gone? Could she carry not just her scars, but his memory into every room, every battle, every silence? The answer would come, but not gently, not quietly. Because the storm waiting ahead would test her more than any rocket, any shrapnel, any scar. What happens when the world stops listening to your words and waits for your actions? Months after her grandfather's funeral, Elena Carter's life had settled into a rhythm she didn't recognize as her own. Flights, briefings, auditoriums, applause, always applause, yet beneath it, silence still clung to her like a shadow. She carried her scar openly now, no longer hiding it. But each time she looked in the mirror, she saw more than the mark of Iron Creek. She saw the weight of every story poured into her. The amputee who whispered, "I thought I was finished." The recruit who said, "They told me I'd never make it." The Marines who came to her not for orders, but for hope. She never asked for this role, but she bore it because walking away would mean silence. And silence was heavier than any scar. Then came the call. A stateside base, a live training exercise. Something had gone wrong, an explosion in the motor pool, chaos, fire, injuries. The situation was still unfolding, but leadership wanted her presence not as a speaker, but as a Marine. When the helicopter touched down, smoke already blackened the sky. Sirens wailed. Medics scrambled across scorched concrete. Flames licked at twisted vehicles, fuel coughing smoke into the air. Elena leapt out, boots striking the ground. She didn't wait for orders. She didn't wait for cameras. She ran toward the fire. A young Marine staggered out of the smoke, uniform charred, eyes wide with panic. "They're trapped inside," he shouted. Elena didn't hesitate. She pulled her flak jacket tighter, pressed the coin in her pocket once, and pushed forward into the haze. Heat seared her skin. Smoke clawed at her throat. But through the roar of fire she heard it, the muffled shouts of Marines still alive. She found two of them pinned beneath debris, metal twisted, flames snapping inches away. Without a word, she dropped to her knees, braced her shoulder, and pushed. Pain flared down her arm, the old wound screaming. But she didn't stop. One Marine wriggled free, coughing, dragging himself toward the exit. The other was still trapped. Elena seized him under the arms, heaved with everything left inside her. Her legs trembled. Her scar burned with sweat. But slowly, inch by inch, she pulled him clear. By the time they stumbled into the open air, her lungs were raw, her vision blurred. Medics rushed forward, dragging the wounded to safety. Elena collapsed to her knees, coughing, gasping, but alive. Around her, Marines stared, some with shock, some with awe, not at a speaker, not at a symbol, but at a Marine who had stepped into fire without hesitation. Collins arrived minutes later, her uniform smeared with ash from helping coordinate the response. She strode to Elena, eyes sharp but filled with something rarely seen, pride unguarded. "You didn't wait," Collins said. Elena wiped soot from her face, her voice hoarse. "There wasn't time." Collins studied her for a long moment. Then, with quiet finality, she said, "This is who you are, not a story, not a headline, a Marine." The words sank deeper than any applause ever had. In the days that followed, reports spread, not about her scar, not about her speeches, but about what she had done. Marines alive because she refused to wait. Marines carried out because she refused to stand still. The headlines tried again. Scarred hero saves Marines from fire. Wounded warrior acts again. But Elena no longer cared what they wrote. Because she knew the truth. She had not acted to prove anything. She had acted because it was what Marines do. Weeks later, she stood before another hall of Marines. Rows of faces stared up, waiting for words. She paused, hands steady on the lectern, scar visible in the light. "This scar," she began softly, "is not who I am. It's proof of what I survived. Proof that I stood when others needed me to. But it doesn't make me stronger than you. It doesn't make me weaker. It just makes me me." She let the silence breathe, her voice low, even. Strength isn't about looking whole. It isn't about never breaking. It's about standing after the fall again and again and again. That's all I've done, and it's all you need to do. The room was silent, not heavy, not cold, silent like breath held, silent like hearts remembering their own scars. Then slowly the applause began, not roaring, not wild, but steady, relentless, the kind that said not "you're different, but you're one of us." Later, outside under the morning sky, Elena walked alone. The dawn light touched the scar on her face, sharp and unhidden. She pressed her grandfather's coin into her palm, the edges cutting just enough to remind her she was still alive. She thought of him. She thought of Collins. She thought of every Marine who had laughed, doubted, whispered, and every Marine who had found strength in her silence. She realized she no longer feared the whispers. She no longer feared the silence. Because dignity didn't speak. It didn't argue. It didn't beg to be seen. It simply acted. And she would keep acting, scar and all. Always.